Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting stream. So this is our first industry spotlight stream. So we've been doing a lot of different streams this year. So we are lucky enough to have the team here from HUXLEY. So allow me to introduce and thank Ben and Sava and Antonio for joining us in this industry spotlight. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to join us and talk about your project.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. This is going to be really exciting. I know this is a project started with you, Ben, you know, and working on it for about 10 years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go through, they're going to share a lot with you all, sharing the process of just even making this, getting to the point they're at with the trailer. I'm sure if you haven't seen it, guess what? You're going to see it today because we're definitely going to be playing that today. So you can see what they've done here. It's pretty amazing. There's a lot of ZBrush and they actually rendered the trailer in Redshift too. So it's going to be amazing for you all. So thank you again, guys, for joining. I'm super excited to have you be a part of our first industry spotlight stream.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it, Paul.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that this is the first industry spotlight. Which is,
me too.
Yeah, me either. That's awesome.
Surprise!
No pressure.
No pressure. No, it's always going good. Yeah, we're having a couple different segments throughout the year. So we've been doing a lot of ZBrush Central industry image breakdowns. So, but this fits better for the industry spotlight. We're showing you guys really that what you guys have done with your project, making a film and a trailer. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Everyone buckle up, as I always say. This is going to be great. So we're gonna start with showing you all the trailer. So get your popcorn ready if you like your popcorn. And we're going to play this trailer for you, and then we're going to come back, and they're going to share a lot of their process with you and how they got to this trailer. So let's play that trailer.
What do you think it is? It's glorious. It's dangerous out there. The city provides protection, some sort of order to this chaos. If we follow the rules and keep our heads down, there's nothing to worry about.
All right, there you have it. There's the trailer. So good job, man. Congratulations, by the way, too. That's beautiful, beautiful work. So I'm excited for getting going, let you guys share what you've been doing on this project. So we're going to start with Ben here. Sure. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Ben, and then I'll be watching the chat. And again, people, you have questions for any of them, funnel them through here. I'll try and throw as many as I can at them, but of course they've got a lot they want to cover. So I'll try and get as many questions out there as I can to them. So Ben, I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. So what is HUXLEY? It's a 6-issue graphic novel series that I created over a decade or so, telling the first story of an original new sci-fi universe I've been creating. Stumbling upon a forgotten treasure map in the form of an ancient sentient robot, two post-apocalyptic scavengers find themselves amidst a mystery of a galactic scale. And so the main thing I wanted to create was this epic, detailed graphic novel that is like a melting pot of my love of like French graphic novels, Japanese manga. I'm a huge Mobius fan. I love Meta Barons, and it's like a European meets like French European graphic novels meets Japanese manga, like Otomo's, Akira, and all the things I love. And so, taking it back to the beginning, this is some of the designs I was doing as far back as like 2008. So the style was there, the design language, the kind of like feeling of things was always kind of there, but I didn't really know what it was going to be called. And around like 2013 or 2014, I designed the orange post-apocalyptic robot named HUXLEY. And I was just like, I need to do something with this. I want to write my own story. And I started thinking about all the different pathways this could go, and a bigger kind of thing I could create with all of this. After working in the film and game industry for so long, films and things are an incredible way to reach a bigger audience, but it usually requires huge teams to create something like that. So for me, a graphic novel or a comic is still one of the ways a single creator can create their entire, like a finished product from start to finish. So, I mean, it's a lot of work, but it is still possible, I feel, as a graphic novel but you basically have to be the writer, director, production designer, concept artist, cinematographer, like everything. And that's why it took me so long to write and illustrate it, but I'm glad I did. And the early days, how did this start? I was working in the film industry on other projects all this time. Took breaks. This is a shot of me living in my parents' basement at the beginning when I was broke, and just like sketching out pages, figuring out what this is going to be, surrounded by thumbnails and comics and writing stuff and notepads. And I was basically traveling the world at the time, living out of a suitcase anyway. So I just rolled with it and did most of the stuff on this little laptop. But over the 3 years of traveling, I went from, making comic pages in hostels, different apartments and condos and whatever I was Airbnb-ing at, to finally needing to settle down and have a bigger studio and more dedicated space that I have now. And basically most of the time was just coming up with little thumbnails of the shots, blocking out maybe 5 to 10 pages at a time, doing hundreds and hundreds of pencil drawings, creating this universe as handmade and custom as possible, and then illustrating to the highest fidelity I could, keeping the style and personality that I was after in all these panels. And yeah, so once I kind of was getting close to finishing the graphic novel, I mean, the bigger goal for all this was obviously I want to make movies, I want to make games, I want to turn this into something bigger. And after working in the film and game industries for so long, I anticipate what all those meetings would be, where, I come in with my graphic novel and they say, "Nice art, kid, but what does this look like as a film?" And so, anticipating how the industry works, I wanted to turn this into something more before I had even finished the graphic novel. And at the time I was traveling for events and things, and met Sava, I think it was in Berlin, maybe, or at
it was Berlin. We met up briefly earlier. I think it was THU in Portugal, yeah. But that was just very brief kind of introduction. But then Berlin was when we officially kicked it off.
Awesome. Yeah. So like I had loved his stuff for a long time, and I think we just met and we're having drinks or something, and it was kind of a moment of just like, I really want to turn this original thing that I'm making into something. And Sal was like, I really want to make original things. Or it was something like that. I was like, hey, let's do it. And so when we got back, it was just like, I sent him a bunch of comic panels, and he mocked up this. I think this was the very first previs he ever sent me. How do I play this?
Yeah, that was the 2D, quote unquote, 2D animatic, based off of the work in progress, close to final panels that you sent over. Yeah.
But you'll see that, like, it's basically exactly the trailer we ended up making, but just with the 2D art. And some of the panels were really rough and unfinished because I was finishing the thing. And
it's almost like you took your, in essence, like a storyboard comic panels.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I mean,
turn them into a storyboard.
I wanted to talk quite a bit about that process. Actually, you can't hear it here, I think, but there's actually my scratch temporary voiceover, me trying to act out the lines with heavy distortions to make it sound a little bit more badass than my natural voice is. But that was honestly one of the most, kind of the funnest parts of the process for me, really, because that's in typical animation pipelines, like when you do storyboards, like storyboards are fun. I'm much more of a previs, 3D previs than a 2D storyboard kind of director. But this was such a unique situation where you have all of these panels ready to go, and it's just like plucking. It's in a way, like a lot of the times when we make game trailers, a lot of the times you have to craft the look of a trailer without the whole, like it's not like you're editing the whole story of the game down into a trailer. You're kind of crafting, those specific shots. Nothing else exists. But with Huxley, like the whole story was there. The whole graphic novel was there. So in essence, it actually was almost like editing down. If the graphic novel itself was a film, it was like editing it down to the specific chunks to actually make an interesting trailer out of it, which is a completely different process than what I'm usually kind of used to. And the fact that it's all illustrated and colored, like that's an extra, inspiring bonus for the first step of the project. It's super inspiring to see that every frame is like a piece of concept art. So it's super inspiring to the team as well. You're immediately seeing what the potential of what this could be. So yeah.
So in the arc of the project, this was about how long ago that you were doing these pre-visits?
This was done back in the January of 2020. Yeah. So we met up. That Berlin meetup was
November.
End of November 2019, and then we talked a little bit about the potential of what we could do. I actually left on my honeymoon after the Berlin conference, so had some time to process something. And then, January 2020 was when we officially started it off. So the beginning of January was sort of laying out the basis of what this trailer could be, laying out the 2D animatic. And as soon as that was done, we immediately went into 3D animatic, which basically worked the same. And that was the official kind of kickoff. And then it took us roughly a whole year. So it was, I think, more or less 11 months of full production, but it wasn't, because the team is kind of, scattered. It wasn't this big studio. It was just a couple of freelance friends, and everyone's kind of working in their own time. That was one of the real reasons why this project could have happened in the first place is we needed a long schedule, a really flexible schedule where everyone can work around their own times. And that's why it took roughly 11 months, but it wasn't, 11 months of full-time production. There's a lot of other things that happen in the mix as well.
11 months really still isn't. Like your team is helping, like, so people know, right? The trailer that you guys did, it was you and like what, another 5 people,
it was in total, I would say 7 or 8 people in total. Which is quite a small team for a trailer of this scale. But yeah, that's one of the, again, the advantages. There's a lot of different things happening in the trailer, but there's a very specific reason why I use specific shots from the novel for the trailer, just knowing, the limitations that we had and what we could work around, and, working with people who are very good at specific things. So, for example, Stephen Corman, an amazing digital matte painter. He took care of some of the kind of biggest opening shots and stuff like that. So it was really, trying to work to our strengths and not bite anything that we couldn't chew off, as a small team. So
awesome. Well, we'll let Ben keep showing.
Sure. Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of as well. Like, maybe we don't talk about is that this was all there was no big company that made this. It was just us, kind of decentralized, like independent and all self-funded as well. Like that was basically every penny I made that year from my game industry salary outside of like rent and food. And I don't think Antonio was like, wait, you didn't have any funding for that? And I was like, no, that was like, my wife was very mad. And like, that's all my money that year, right? Like, I was just like, I just want to make this cool thing. Tell me how much it costs. I'll figure it out. And I just made it work. And I don't know. I just feel like you got to do what you got to do to make something cool and just figure out a way to make it work.
The passion and drive, man, that you guys had just to make this happen.
Yeah. So once Sava sent, actually, there's a funny story when Sava sent that, because part of me was like, maybe I want to be more involved. And I was like trying to cut together what I thought would be cool. And then Sava sent that so fast. And I watched that and I was like, no, you do it. And I deleted mine. And I was just like, you're the guy, like, you do this.
Yeah.
It was just a moment of like, no, this is a totally another skill. He's amazing at this. Like, I'm get out of the way and let him do his thing. And it was literally, that was the first thing he sent. I was like, I love it. And then we just locked it down. And that's basically what the trailer ended up being. But so once we kind of did that, it became into like working with Antonio and the team to like build out the characters. I think the characters ended up being some of the most time consuming stuff, but a lot of it was back and forth, me, the team mocking things up, me going to ZBrush where needed to like work on proportions or show what I needed and give notes and things. And I don't know if Antonio did the block out for the demon head or if it was
yeah, that was the first week, I think, if I remember correctly. It was
Yeah.
like make a full test of,
Yeah. So a lot of it was like sketch overs, like I want the neck details to be like this, or making sure the head forms looked a certain way, and doing really rough blockouts where needed to get proportions down to save time, or sketch overs of armor breakups and this kind of stuff. And
Right. So Antonio's doing ZBrush blockouts, sending them to you, and then you're doing sketch overs saying what
sketch overs, yeah, or me going into ZBrush where needed. Like I think this I actually sculpted on a ZBrush screen previously. So I was sculpting that out, and I was just like, actually, this is a proportion I'm thinking. Because if you look on the left, we had a slightly different proportion, and we kind of just matched it to.
And I prepared the first sketch to show because it was completely different. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny.
And then basically, a lot of that just like months and months of going through each character. Oh, we need the gun. What does the gun look like? And turning that into a task and mocking things up in 3D and sending it to them. And we just make it more detailed. And just tons of notes and going back and forth, going into 2D to paint out like what the chest armor on the robot looks like. I think I went into ZBrush to like adjust proportions and add all these pipes and things all over him.
Is that a ZBrush render?
I think so.
I used like the ZBrush sketch shaders to give it kind of like a 2D look. It's really cool. Same thing for the Onyx, like going back and forth, like, oh, I want the end to look like this. That was quite an involved task, but it was really fun. And then notes on like textures and what we should do, and even though you don't even see any of this in the trailer, like, but I knew later I wanted to maybe make a game or movie or whatever, and we probably will end up seeing that, so we might as well design the whole thing. And then going back and forth with Sava as he was mocking up scenes and like, oh, maybe we add a bolt or something here, and early like texture tests and stuff, or adapting the comic panels and things. It was really cool because like, I mean, I have to do this all the time for other people's stuff. You know, if you work on Spider-Man, they're like, here's a shot from Spider-Man. What does a realistic version of the web slinger look like? And you had to figure it out and adapt someone else's thing. But it was really cool to just adapt your own work.
Right.
And some other early stuff of Sava. Like, I remember when he sent me this early block out of that shot, and I was like, oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
This is the one that I was the most excited about, probably just from a purely CG perspective. This is the shot that I was like, all right, I've been shying away from crowds for way too long. I need to figure out the crowd. But yeah, this is You even sent me the original drawing for this one. This is probably one of my favorite shots for the whole thing.
It's cool. It was very like faithfully. Like it's kind of crazy how close.
Yeah,
it matched the. Yeah, it's really cool. That was one of the ones I was just like, damn.
Right. So your drawing's all the way to the left, and then Sava's lighting test is all the way to the right.
Yeah, this is all the way to the right is the lighting test with no textures. I think that's like one of the early work in progress versions that's not textured. So it's just like gray asset placeholder figures.
Yeah, so you're using the middle asset in the middle to light and just see what you're lighting.
Yeah, exactly. The middle one.
Do you do that often? Do you just to figure out your lighting first? Is this something that you do often for yourself? Take just the gray assets and render and do lighting tests?
Not necessarily, because like that's sort of in a way like the past life. I guess like we're jumping, a little bit all over the place here, but like for me, as a brief introduction, like my past is as a CG generalist, and I've been doing that for quite a while, and then I've transitioned into directing about 5 years ago. So these days, whenever I'm directing for client work, I usually work through Axis Studios or Hydra Studios, where I'm specifically focusing on directing and not hands-on work. But because I have that CG knowledge and background, I use that every once in a while for my own short films. And on those projects, which Huxley was sort of one of those as well, I've devoted quite a bit of my time to get that project to happen. But in those type of projects, in traditional kind of CGI pipelines such as this one, which was done with Redshift, I think I would probably not really start with the daylight. Like this is probably the daylight render here was just to check the model, basically just the actual geometry model. But then as soon as possible, I would try to mimic, the actual final lighting situation, and then, rework the asset from there. Because there's a lot of the times when you actually go into that kind of final shot lighting, you don't even see half of the things that you think are noticeable. So you're probably saving quite a bit of time on not focusing and not modeling or not texturing things that are going to be blocked or falling into shadow or something like that. So the sooner you can get into shot lighting, the better for production. But I think for this one, just because I was so focused on kind of nailing the look of the novel, I did do those first kind of daylight tests just to check the models a little bit more clearly, I guess.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably getting to the end for me. I think the last thing was just like getting into final shot stuff where it was just like paint overs back and forth with Steven on like, say, the desert shot, and like we were playing with like how far the desert creeps in and stuff. But a lot of it was just a lot of back and forth and stuff like this. And yeah, I'll pass it off to, I think, Antonio next. To go into more hardcore ZBrush.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that last one is, for me, one of my favorite in your guys' trailer. That epic shot with that ship, and that's just an epic.
Oh, that's when the music drops as well, and that's when it starts getting serious. But that's I think building on top of what Ben said there. I think that was one of the kind of key things with this project is. Given my previous experience in working in kind of AAA game cinematic studios, that's the stuff that I wanted to apply to this project as much as I can. That kind of same pipeline, the same workflows, the same mentality of approaching tasks. And that's where that kind of longer schedule really, really helped us out. Effectively, Ben and I co-produced the trailer. I directed it, and Ben, given the fact that it's his world and it's his design, he basically had a role of an art director for this one. And in a typical animation pipeline, an art director would provide all of those, like when we do assets or when you do shot productions, like all of those paint overs are so incredibly valuable for the project. And the more iterations you have, the more we're able to iterate on a shot, on a asset. It just helps feed into that kind of high production quality at the end. So, whichever of those shots you look at, like, for example, like you said, Paul, like your favorite shot, that desert, that was, that must have been, sixth iteration of that shot or something like that, from not really from scratch, but like a serious iteration of things changing along the way. And even the first time that I saw that, the first iteration to me was completely amazing. But when you push it bit by bit with all those paint overs, we're trying out all of those different things. That's where the actual kind of quality comes into play, and that's something that not a lot of productions can do, just because of the time limitations. And when you're stretched out with time or compressed with time, you just don't have enough time to do all of those iterations. But when you do, like, that's where the project really benefits, and that was definitely the goal here, and what we were. I'm very glad that we were able to do that. It was a long process. It was definitely the longest project that I've ever worked on. Usually the game cinematics or stuff, I mean, it's the bigger teams, so things are happening more rapidly. But usually game cinematics are anywhere from 5 to 6 months. But this was 11 months of I kind of had to be involved all throughout with kind of overseeing everything. But
another thing that was cool was or another thing that helped was because I have been working on this so long, and I did a lot of like experimentation and things. So like even like that desert shot, I built out quite an elaborate scene in Blender for the panel in the comic. You don't really see the whole thing, but like I built out like a pretty elaborate scene that we ended up using as like the base, which was really cool. And so there's just a lot of like assets I had that I was like, actually, maybe it's a starting point and feel free to redo it. But we kind of ended up using quite a bit of things and speed things up. And
that's always, from my experience, that's always such an invaluable part of the process when, the actual art has already a basis in 3D that can be just repurposed into assets or used to be built on top of, because it immediately gives you a sense of scale, the proportions, the overall shape, language, and design. So whether that was just for that shot or whether that was, the rough sculpts that Ben did for like the demon robot or, for any of the other characters like that, that's always vastly, speeds the whole process up, just because we immediately have that design in 3D. But just to, I don't have anywhere near as organized presentation in terms of slides, so I'm just going to be, sifting through my giant pile of kind of assets folder. But basically, I mean, to go a little bit, I guess, through my process, I mean, we already showed, sorry, I'm just going to kick open this file, and it wasn't open for ages, so it's probably chugging a little bit.
So you were working, Sava, since you were working on this, so you were working on other projects though too at the same time, right?
Yeah. So I was directing another trailer at Axis at the time, and it's sort of, directing is in animation, it's not always a full-time job. Sometimes it's down to just reviews. Sometimes it's down to a little bit more of hands-on work. But you can always kind of fill time around and find. You always have multiple things going on at once. Even if you're not working on multiple projects at once, you're always either pitching on future work or developing other stories or shorts. So there's always, kind of multiple things happening at once. I think because, making short films of any kind, it's an enormous amount of work. You kind of have to have a lot of things, even either started or in development. So you kind of, you're trying to float all these other things and seeing what kind of floats and what sinks. So yeah, there's always a few things happening, but for the most part, for 2020, Huxley and the other project, which I can't talk about at Axis, it's still not public. That was kind of the two main ones that occupied the most part of my year. So yeah, this is the first pass that showed as well, that first pass of the 2D animatic, which is probably the most inspiring 2D animatic I've ever had the pleasure of working with. It's just so awesome, working with basically finished paintings. I mean, it's just a whole other level than your typical kind of 2D storyboard. Then from that, the next step would be to go into a 3D previs, which is essentially taking what was done in 2D animatic, transforming it into 3D, and kind of focusing more on camera animation and exploring the depths of a 3D space. Some of the things that you can do in 2D, like actually go into the shot, you can't do in 3D. So this is kind of I think which one was this, version 4. So there's a couple of versions before this one that was just kind of fine-tuning things. And there's things that are off here in terms of scale, but for the most part, the 3D previs is basically, in essence, it's a version of a 3D sketch. It's something that's very rough. Lighting isn't final. All the assets are placeholder. Everything you see is absolutely placeholder. Like this is one of the initial sketches from Ben, like very, very rough 3D sketch for the demon that I just used as an asset. But all the animation, everything here is super, super placeholder. But it gets across the idea, and it gets across the shot construction in 3D, and it gets across the edit. And that's the main point here. The main point is to construct the edit, to construct the almost final duration. You always need to leave a little bit of flex for actual animation. When motion capture and animation come into play, they tend to prolong or shorten certain actions than a rough 3D previs can. So there's always a little bit of wiggle room with the actual duration, but we stayed pretty faithful to what's been done here, basically. So then from the 3D previs, the next step is when we actually have this, when we have this, we have pretty much all the information that we need. We have all of the shots, the exact amount of shots, the exact amount of environments, the exact amount of characters that we have to make. So we have a whole list basically that we can make into a production Bible of what actually needs to be created for this trailer. And from that point onwards, I can say, for a lot of, I tend to say, like whenever I do projects like this, I tend to credit myself as a director, and pretty much that's it. But the truth is that because I have that CG generalist background, there's a lot of other kind of hats that I have to wear throughout the project. So most of the environments, all of the kind of camera animation, even some cleanup character animation, all of the lighting, compositing, rendering, that was all done by myself, with a few additions from, like I mentioned previously, Stephen Corman, who handled the most expansive big scale shots. So this is the stage where I kind of decide, like, all right, we have this huge opening, canyon shot, and this is probably not really the holy grail of CG, but midday lighting, when you see everything so clearly, like that's always going to be way more difficult to pull off than like a night shot where everything falls into shadow and you don't see anything. So day lighting is always much more intense and kind of requires more attention to detail. And the fact that this is like such a giant scale, shot, that's not really something I'm good at. So I know that, all right, if I get Steven to help me out in this, like this is definitely going to be one of his shots. So this is where I kind of break it off and say, like, all right, this is going to be a DMP shot. This big city opening is going to be a DMP shot. These two crowd shots is something that I really wanted to take on myself. It's something I was, again, like the artwork was really inspiring to me. So I kind of, I wanted to take the reins on that. But then like all of these vast environmental shots like this one, the DMP background of this space shot, and then the city behind this, like all of those vast environments were handled by Stephen Corman. And once we had that breakdown, then we can, just start chipping away basically. So from this point onwards, I would, we would break things off into who would tackle what. So Antonio would start working on Huxley, for example. Bigo, who is another character artist who helped us out, was working on Max or Kai, I believe, Antonio.
Yeah.
And then Mihailo, Mihailo, a good friend of mine, was working on Scrape, the robot, and the Onyx spacecraft, as seen here. So it's a lot of things happening in parallel. A lot of people working on different assets at the same time.
How many animators did you have?
I believe on this project there was only 2 animators in total. So we shot the motion capture. We shot the motion capture for the project.
Okay.
The motion capture, we shot it only with 2 actors, and then we kind of repurposed and had to do a lot of different takes to cover, shots that had multiple people in them. And then most of the performances came from the mocap shoot. The animation polish pass that happens on top is always super important, but With this one, it was more in terms of, because some of the characters have, vastly different proportions. There's a lot of kind of unique shape language happening in the character. So there's a lot of work that goes into cleaning up, making sure there's no intersections, there's no, geometry poking through. A lot of that stuff, by, doing it only with motion capture, you'll naturally get those intersections. And those intersections, no matter how good your renders are, always take you out, because you see something that, it's like a geometry poking through one another. So it immediately breaks the immersion of this is a real thing that's happening. Like, it doesn't even have to be super realistic. It can be a stylized animation, but a clear telltale sign of 3D is when, geometry clips one to another. So this would be like, in terms of that, like this would be the first, let me just dial it back. This is like the mocap edit. So like I said, like while the character assets and is being built, I was already starting to work on environments. So this edit will have some of the work in progress environments like this one. And because we shot the motion capture without having final assets or final rigs, we're just using like placeholder human models, basically, that you're gonna see here. So it's just like a generic human figure that gets across the performance that we captured on the day. And it helps us to choose the actual moment of the performance. So this edit is actually, you can see the animation is off here. He's almost doing like a salute instead of a point, and there's no finger animation. The raw motion capture data basically is very rough. It's kind of jittery, and it doesn't include finger animation, but it's just there so you can actually pick, all right, this is the time range that I want for this shot. So we need to clean this time range up and basically transfer it to the rest of the models. So you can see, yeah, there's a lot of kind of clipping here, but you can see kind of the makings of, this is my friend. I think this is trying to, act it out as he is being shot. But yeah, this is, I guess, super fun stuff, at least for me to look at, kind of the early makings of this. And then from that, once the mocap, these are, by the way, the 2 stars. And a fun fact, so Milan on the left, both of these are super close friends of mine. Milan is an amazing concept artist, so he's also a ZBrush powerhouse as well in terms of concept art. And then on the right is who is a composer. So he actually composed the music for HUXLEY trailer. Which is always, and he always kind of, at least in my personal short films, he's always the mocap actor there. He has a incredibly cool body language to work with for mocap.
So you actually go rent out studio space?
Yeah. So there's
you do the mocap. How many days?
No, it was a really fast shoot. This is because effectively it's a 1.5-minute trailer, but if you really break out, the moments of performance, there's not a lot of complicated things happening in animation. It's basically people standing around and people walking, if you really take a look at it, which is also one of the things like that I factored in very early on. So the animation side of things wasn't really complex on this one. There's not a lot of complex animation stuff happening, which is carefully hidden by, all of the amazing design and, everything kind of coming together. But this is the actual animation edit once all of the kind of files are cleaned up and all of the assets are actually brought in with all the final rigs. I think this even has the cloth simulation perhaps on this edit. So it's this kind of slow drip feed of things kind of slowly coming together and making this trailer whole. Yeah.
Well, for such a small team, you guys are doing such like huge shots. like you didn't just go, oh, let's keep the camera kind of close most of the time. You're like, no, let's do it. Let's go big, right?
Yeah, well, that's one of
the crowd. How did you do all the crowd stuff?
I can talk a little bit about it. So that there's also there's a few things happening in there where if you kind of know some of the tricks behind the production, like you can kind of hide. Like for example, like the opening shot of the canyon. The camera is moving past and it's kind of diving down. So that's a complex shot. Like that's not a simple DMP. That DMP has to be based in 3D and then projected on top of that geometry. So that's what Steven's really good at. But then you take a look at a shot like this, basically, which is a huge opening shot and scale, is massive in this one, but it's a simple tilt down in terms of what the camera is doing. So it's nowhere near as complex to set up as the opening canyon shot. Actually, this one is easier. There's a lot less technicality going on because there's, the camera is just tilting. So the background can almost be just a still image. And then you kind of hide it with all the ships moving, with all the, volumetric haze and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of trickery involved in this one. For the city shot, for example, like that's why I really wanted to do those is from the start, I kind of had a solution in mind because I come from, so my CG generalist background. Before my CG generalist background, I had an architectural background. I studied interior and furniture design. So my kind of early days in CG were dealing a lot with ArcViz, architectural visualization. And there's this software for architectural visualization for visualizing large kind of city blocks and I guess towers and stuff. That's really simple for crowd simulation. Like it's a software basically just made for ArcViz for crowd simulation. And this is kind of the how it kind of looks like. So it's a standalone software where you can, it's glitching out. It's a standalone software where you just import your ground plane and you can make your little paths, like literally draw paths like splines, and randomized kind of group of people will walk around. They would even kind of, if you can see here, they would even kind of avoid each other and do like, like they'll try to not intersect with one another. They still do at places, but if you keep your camera pretty far away, you can kind of get away with it.
Yeah.
So it's very simple software. Like crowd simulations are usually very, very complex and very, especially when you're talking about, large battles, like massive software, like what they've done on Lord of the Rings, for example. But when it comes to something like this, which is more like ambiental, just a bunch of people walking, this software does an incredible job at it. And it was a neat little trick that worked really well for this project. And yeah, even, again,
I love
little plug for Redshift. This whole scene is all geometry, no instances, nothing, just rendered on a single machine with no issue whatsoever with all these characters. So that's a little thing that I'm still kind of like, all right, it's pretty powerful.
And then you mentioned on your system that each frame took about what, 2-3 minutes at max?
Yeah, for those two shots in particular, those were the only kind of a little bit more intense shots. So for example, this one was, I think, roughly between 4 and 5 minutes per frame. And then this shot was the longest one. This was up to 7 minutes per frame, which still isn't, crazy. This shot is only maybe 4 seconds, so it's like 7 times, what's that? 24 times 4. My math is failing me, but it's not a long time. It's basically an overnight render. You set it up and it's done in the morning. So it's not something that you have to wait years for, basically. So that's I guess the overall kind of stuff that I would do to set everything up and to kind of get most of the kind of things together to form this trailer. And then in all the along the setting up of the whole pipeline and the whole kind of the shots and the tasks, Antonio would be doing the asset work, all the character asset work, and then when he finishes that, he would send everything. We would update all of the scenes, and then I would go into lighting and compositing, which I can talk a little bit later. Maybe we give the floor to Antonio now to show us a little bit of that asset awesomeness. And yeah, I can finish up with the compositing.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Antonio.
Okay. Okay, guys. So I prepared here two of all the characters for the HUXLEY trailer. So this is Max, and I also have here the main character HUXLEY with some. 1 second. With some textures on, the final textures of the character. And I also, the thing that I was talking about when Ben was talking is the first sketch. Okay, so guys, you need an art director on your projects. This is why. Okay. Okay, that was the first iteration. I did it with Lucas Salamon, and was super fast builded, trying to have the final topologies, okay, to work on it, but was completely,
Oh man,
there's no way.
Yeah, that's
What's crazy?
a big change. I think this is why I also like art books. You even see in big projects how much iterations they go through and things like that. And I think that's one of the things people that want to do kind of what you guys are doing. There's always iteration. It's always going to happen.
There's always iteration, and what's cool to to have Ben that can open ZBrush and move here, move there, and we have something to start to continue working on it. That was the cool thing, because in other projects it's like 2 lines and we are kind of conceptual things that it's difficult to understand, but for these kind of things we're pretty fast to understand, the feedback, all the kind of things. So I want to show you guys more like Max, because I think Max the first one were done with Sergio. Sergio do like the early blocking. He do the face sculpting, and like that. All the topology was done in ZBrush with Chirimes and all the kind of things. Okay, and later we make like I will say a little bit better, something that can handle a little bit better on for the renderer. Okay, so basically when we start to doing like the material, the material sculpting, because as you can see it's a comic trailer, so from the beginning like Ben draws all these like big sharp lines over the characters, on the pieces, on the plates, and all the kind of things. So it was something that was the beginning of the character, like all these kind of things here. So we try to think about materials for the characters to make it look a little bit more like sci-fi thing, but it's still some kind of plastic or leathers or something like that. Okay, so I want to show you guys more or less what I did, because I think it's cool to show you guys how I did these kind of things. But so I prepared like this simple plate of the chest. Okay, so Paul, if there are some questions.
Yeah, well, someone was asking earlier, and I knew you were going to show the models. They were asking specifically, how long did it take you, say, to do the demon?
Well, okay, the demon was, I think,
probably the longest, but
the longest.
Yeah, but
Yes,
there's yeah.
Sorry, Sava, continue.
No, go ahead.
I think this one that I did mostly with Lucas. Vigo helped, Sergio helped doing some the first part of the legs, if I remember correctly. But like we had something in mind, and we start to do like I don't know, animation tests for the hands, and how everything is going to move. And Ben said like, no, guys, I want things like that. And was more easy that what we thought on the beginning. So was like, okay, let's start to build, and let Ben tell us a little bit how to follow the design. But I think was like 2 months. Meanwhile I was working on Kai or Max, if I remember correctly. Lucas were building like these multiple pieces. Like multiple pieces that we were building in some kind of, like shoulders and arms, all the kind of things. And then we move it to Ben to start, doing the really proportion and then readjust. So yeah, I think it was like 2 months of character.
Yeah, the thing with the demon was that it definitely required the most kind of figuring out of how it's going to move. You know, there's a lot of detail in that character, and there's a lot of initial time that was spent to like the mechanics of Lucas, who Antonio mentioned was our rigger on the project, but he also helped out with some of the kind of hard surface character creation stuff. And he really wanted to, you know, really dive deep into the mechanics of how that character would move. But that ended up being so complex, and as well for a trailer like this where we don't really see the inner workings of those mechanics, it was a little bit of a waste of time, in my opinion. And then also there's a lot of things in the actual design that kind of happened along the way, like while we were figuring that stuff out. That's when Ben did like the paint overs and just added a bazillion other, you know, cables and stuff like that. And those cables were really helpful in hiding the mechanics. So like the whole shoulder, basically, there might be some mechanic happening underneath all of those cables, but we don't really see them. Like they're just
that was the thing
cables that are deforming. So
we at the beginning like super complex things, you know, like you know, trying to build things, and was like, no, you know, but I had to say it was one of the first big super projects that Lucas and me were involved on it. So was quite, you know, the kind of expectation to do a lot of things, you know, trying to build, but you know, the time always is kind of, you know, difficult.
What you just brought up is a great segue to a question that was just asked. How do you model and sculpt with movement in mind? So obviously you guys are starting and then bringing it down for the thought process of it's going to have to be animated and movement. So what are you guys doing when you're modeling, Antonio, this and thinking about this character having to move? How are you breaking down these plates?
For example, normally when we work in this kind of characters that are like some kind of armor or something that, you know, is going to be, it's important to give the rigger some kind of base topology to you know, to have like the initial rigging, you know, all the ways for the movement and everything, so they can start to build things over that. And you know, it's important to keep in mind that this is something that other person is going to take it later, you know. So for the animation specific, for example, for the character, was that, you know, to have something in the in the character, you know, so all of the animation will work properly with that base topology, and then all the other things start to build in on the top.
So when you were working on Max, you were already giving that base mesh you just showed to the animator, so they can start building the rig.
Well, to the rigger, I mean, it's definitely a multi-department thing. Like the rigging isn't just coming at the end and trying to figure everything out.
Right.
They're involved sort of as early as they can be, and a lot of the problem solving kind of happens in the early stages. Like with Max, for example, I mean, because his armor is a little bit more forgiving, it's not really metal. It's more kind of Kevlar, something like a kind of hardened Kevlar that can, you know, have a little bending and kind of squashing within it. It's definitely way more forgiving for rigging, but also Lucas did quite a bit of extra controls for Max to be able to control the, you know, various like shoulder pads and stuff like that to move them out of the way. Having said that, there's always intersections, and not, you know, that this happens across, you know, even like the stuff that we do at Axis. Like you'll always, you know, you'll be working on whatever Halo trailer and you'll figure out that Master Chief is intersecting in this one frame. So someone has to go in by hand and move this little piece of armor, or move this little piece of geometry out of the way. And there's a lot of stuff that happened like that on Max, for example. There's a lot of those plates that were kind of intersecting as he was doing some of the more extreme movements, like when he shoots and when he kind of turns around, so his whole torso kind of twists. That's where all the kind of problems arise. So you kind of have to go in and you know, do a lot of things. This is where you know, working in a not real-time pipeline, but in like staying in 3D, you can go in and you can, independently of the rig itself, you can do like in Max specifically, in 3ds Max, I mean, you can do, you know, like volume selection of specific areas of the mesh, like soft selections, and move them around, animate them around basically as they're moving. And that's the stuff that, you know, you'll always have to do that. You can avoid that with rigs if you build like a super freaking insane complex rig. But for the purposes of this trailer, that was definitely an overkill. So
right.
So yeah.
So until you're showing a technique that you did for all the damage that you're putting, you're doing it all by hand, all your damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
No.
The first no. The big parts always by hand, and I prepare here, like, you know, the brushes that I use, is the Orb Crass, the these Seawing, you know, these scenes from Jonas Rowe, and these scratches for Fredo Gutierrez. So like, for example, talking one day with Ben, Ben told me that we wanted to make like this plastic leather Kevlar thing, you know, but a little bit more sci-fi. So what I try to mix is like the metal things over the fabric, you know, so these kind of things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was to have something that normally we use on metals, but I try to put in some parts to give it, like, you know, like that extra details. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and also these kind of
the subtle scratches and damage.
Yeah, but you know, it's like at some point, you know, when we have like these kind of things. So there's again other layer of detail by hand on the top to push a little bit some parts, because it was important for all the pipeline, so we have more detail on the bakes, you know, so we can use more maps to quite push a little bit more the shapes, the details, and all that kind of things. Because, for example, if I'm not wrong, we didn't use displacement for this part in a specific, Sava.
Maybe, I'm not sure. 2 years ago.
Well, I think I remember that we don't use displacement just for the heads.
Yeah, I think displacement was saved for like the really close-up shots.
Yeah.
Everything further away was working just fine with normal maps.
Yeah.
I remember being very specific about the armor material. I think initially it was literally like a Kevlar material. I was like, no. And I think the team really wanted that, but I was like, I want this like made up sci-fi tech that almost looks like, because I'm obsessed with like Japanese model kits, and there's a certain look that comes from the material, and it just looks like some made up sci-fi thing. And I really wanted to capture this like Japanese model kit quality, but more realistic in a way. And it's not Kevlar. It's not like an earth-based, like, it looks like some far away other planet kind of material, but realistic. And I think we captured it pretty well when you get whenever someone gets up.
Someone was actually asking earlier how you maintained your style for the 10 years working on it.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, a good question.
Just naturally, I mean, it changed a little bit as I was more open to like experimenting with tools like Blender and adding like 3D stuff like ZBrush and stuff as I started building. But like, I think because I had designed all those characters by hand, like, I feel like anything you draw on paper is like inherently you. Like, you can't, there's no other things involved. It's just your brain and a pencil and a piece of paper, and what's coming out is like you. And so all the characters were designed that way, where it was like, this is like my brain on paper and I can't help it. It's going to look like me.
Right.
And so all the main characters were designed this way and pretty solidified, I think, in the comic and in illustrated form. So they're pretty established by then. So even if I experimented later, I had the shape design and everything locked into stone. But it is tough. I think the hardest thing for this was like translating it into 3D. So it was very faithful and done in a way that it looked like a real version of this comic panel come to life. And I feel like I just don't see that very often, or the translation is totally different. You're like, well, what is that? That's not that's a totally different thing now. But I feel like we did a good job, especially on like HUXLEY that Antonio was showing, where it was like you could almost overlay the drawing, and I went in by hand and like matched all that up as closely as I possible, because I know what I want it to look like in 3D, but I just don't have that kind of time when I'm drawing it. But once I was able to go into ZBrush certain times, I was just like matching the drawing and like interpreting things that I didn't have time to draw. And there's certain things we could do slightly differently, but I think we were pretty faithful overall to what I had in mind. And yeah, it's just a fun process to like I was limited by like illustrating by hand, but I know what it looks like after working on so many films and games, live action film games my whole career. So like it's like almost like a shorthand for what I have in mind, but it would take me like a year to do one page if I did it to that level of fidelity.
Yeah, but it sounds like the fact that you know ZBrush and using ZBrush too helps communicating with Antonio, right? And
for sure, especially on like the demon. I don't know if we have the first sketch of the demon, but it was very like almost kind of skinnier, and it was like very like straight. Like some of the details were there, but I was like, I know exactly what I want this proportion to look like. Just give me like a couple days or something.
Right.
Yeah, I remember. I
was very specific about like it's got to be this exact kind of pipe for the neck, and I like found the exact pipe I wanted, and like the like rib detail, and like I'm just I'm obsessed with like sci-fi little details like that. But then it was cool because like I really wanted to go crazy with all these smaller cables and things all over, so it felt almost like blood vessels of a robot, just like interconnecting all these little pieces of him. And luckily in animation, we were smart about like, okay, it's not going to cross over this, or we did it in a way where it didn't look too weird, I think.
And then for the coloring, did you do any blocking out in polypaint at all? Or
Yeah. I normally we always do like previous coloring or something like that. But we, at the last steps, after we jump on textures, some of the kind of things, I remember that I start to send it to Ben, like, these kind of things with some kind of layering to do it later, because that's the thing we normally try to. This is something that I learned to the beginning of the ZBrush thing was to make the things have multiple layering, all the kind of things. So I remember to send Ben like a couple of screenshots with the layering for the Kevlar, sci-fi Kevlar or whatever. It's something that really helps me to sell the final thing.
Yeah, I know even a lot of people were commenting when you pulled these, they saw your polygon count. Like, they're like, whoa, 240 million.
Yeah. And this is one of the easy.
Did you guys estimate any of the hard surface stuff and just throw it in Redshift, in Maxon Redshift, or it was all normal map? Like the weapons or like the ship.
Oh yeah, no, it was all, so everything was sculpted, yeah, but everything had normal maps on it. So all of the high frequency detail was baked in Substance, and that's where we did the final texturing.
Yeah. And Antonio, I see you lay down your alphas here, and then you're going to find parts of the alpha you're seeing and just exaggerating them and adding more detail even to those laid down alphas that you have.
More or less, that's the thing for almost all the characters. So as you can see here, it's more or less like that. It's in all the characters was more or less like this, because a few of them, the materials are more or less the same. I always try to give it a little bit of tweak here. For example, between Max and the guards that have like this similar material, but for example, for the guards, we use it like a bigger grain for the final details, so everything looks more stronger at some point, so that kind of things. For example, for the head, we use it, if I remember correctly, texturing exquisite to make all the little details of the of the head.
Yeah.
But as you can see, it's just a couple of extra brushes, but all the other stuff is done by standard and standard 3D dynamic move. The move is the best one always.
And you're not using HD geometry in any of this.
No.
Who's handling the production of this? So Ben, you're doing a lot of art directing. A question came up with Sava. Were you like, all right, I'm overseeing also the obvious directory? Are you seeing also the production of the whole?
Yes. So I basically got the team together and oversaw the whole. So that's one of the many hats that I had to wear in this project. Is I also had to do all the breakdowns, get the team together, and basically oversee, in a way, CG soup it as well. Like oversee everything basically from beginning to end. So yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah,
so
a lot of work.
Yeah,
It's always a lot of work. Yeah,
it's always a lot of work. That's
yeah.
But yeah,
that's awesome.
That's another thing too. Is like just the amount of time it takes, and I know people starting their own things. That's always, or when I was starting things when I was like at the beginning of Huxley, you get anxiety or worried, like, man, you mentally calculate how long it's gonna take based on how long these early pages are, and you're just like, this is probably going to take a lot of years, and you kind of get scared and be like, most people would be like, that's too much time, I'm going to do something else. But in my mind, I'm just like, well, the time's going to pass anyway, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're going to get old, the year is going to go by, I might as well dedicate my life to something that I feel many years later is going to be really cool, and it's like representation of me and the things I love, and hopefully other people like it. And but the time's going to pass anyway. Like, what is our purpose here? What are we doing here? Like, what is our goals in our life? And even if it is going to take a long time, like, it's worth committing that time and committing our life to something we are passionate about, and might as well just go for it, and instead of chasing these like short-term things. Or I know like the Instagram generation, we're all affected by it. Like, we'd like to do something and then get immediate feedback. But in my mind, I'd rather dedicate years of my life into something that's going to be way cooler once it's out the door than these kind of quick fixes we get every day by kind of getting addicted to social media. So I think if anyone is out there watching this and has a cool idea that they're maybe worried or stressed that it's going to take a lot of years to finish, I would just say stick with it, go for it. And the world needs more original voices and more original worlds to get lost in, and it's never going to happen unless we do it,
Yeah, I think another good point is what you made with Sava, right? When he was talking about doing the shots originally, and then you were making them. I think that was a really good point by Ben, saying when you find someone else you can work with, and if they're good at that, let them do it. Like, let go of that part of the project and let them have that, because they're going to execute it at a higher level, possibly. That's the hardest thing, I think, as an artist, letting go of stuff sometimes that you're creating. Yeah.
I think just not being too like learning to let things go. Like, in my mind, like, the comic is like the purest representation of my brain, and that kind of got that out of my system. So once we started doing this, I know there's just going to be compromises, or just other people are involved. It's going to change in some form, and that's okay. You just have to be like, and being open to that was really cool, because it's like, I have no idea where this is going to go, but I trust that it's going to be pretty cool, because I think everyone involved in it is amazing at what they do. And so to me, that's an exciting thing. The unknown is exciting and not scary to me. So it's just like, let's see what happens. Let's see where this goes. And whatever we see, we always just try to push it, make it even better from everyone's standpoint. We're all just trying to like pushing it into the best possible thing it could be. And I think we made something really cool and special, and just has like a handmade quality to everything that I don't feel comes along very often. And just when people see something and it just feels like they haven't seen that before, and I just feel like that is a more and more rare thing, and as a result of just me making something in isolation and not really sharing it for almost a decade until it was done.
That's the big point to make there is, all of this stuff, making the trailer itself has been a lot of work, but all of that is being possible because there's all of this work to build on top of and to pull from. So all of the, everything is designed, everything is bespoke in the trailer. There's no prefabs in there. There's maybe a little bit of off-the-shelf assets, but for the most part, 95% of it, I would say, is handmade. And that's one of the things that I was pushing for very much with this project is getting that sense and kind of translating all those shape languages in the design from the graphic novel basically into 3D. It has to be made by hand. It can't be anything pre-made because it'll just be, there's so many assets out there that's being used all over the place, and they do help you get ahead of the curve they help you basically create an environment really fast by using like a asset depository. But because everyone else is using them as well, it creates almost like, you kind of recognize, oh, there's an asset from that, there's a building from that, there's a
it's like red wax and ZBrush.
Yeah. But by actually spending all the time to kind of build everything properly, that's kind of, it's retaining the essence of the graphic novel. And for me, that was one of the main goals with kind of the visual aesthetics of this, was really trying to stay true to the graphic novel. And my experience and expertise in CGI lies more in the hyperreal than photoreal. Photoreal is an entirely different ball game that I'm nowhere near qualified to talk about. But in hyperreal, things are a little bit more forgiving. And given that this is based on a graphic novel, which in itself is this kind of fantastical sci-fi world, it lends itself to the hyperreal aesthetic really well. But in order to transfer that really, successfully into CG, there's a lot of work that goes into, everything from design to the way Antonio is going to be sculpting all of the assets to the way that we're going to be texturing everything. And texturing is probably one of the biggest, points here to make. And the use of Substance Painter is something that was incredibly helpful on this project, and it was enabled us. Basically, everything is textured with Substance. Every single asset you see in the trailer has had a Substance kind of pass on it, and that's what really enabled us to capture that grungy, dirty, old, forgotten, rusty look of the world that is Huxley. And without Substance, I mean, just leveraging the power of kind of procedural texturing in Substance. That was, that would have been much, much harder. And then to that point, again, ZBrush on top of that, using Substance without ZBrush is a completely different thing. So once you've actually done all of the detail passes in ZBrush and you chuck that into Substance, it reacts to all of those little crevices, all of those little scratches that Antonio made just now. Substance is going to recognize that, and it's going to do wonderful things on top of that. It's going to do wonderful scratches, wonderful leakage in all of the right places where it needs to do. There's a lot of hand painted moments which Antonio added himself. But for example, for myself, with environments, most of the environments are completely, just like a smart material in Substance applied to a mesh that has basically detail baked on from a high poly ZBrush sculpt. So it was incredibly helpful in getting the aesthetic of the comic book, basically, on screen.
Yeah, I think what you guys are saying is just great to be able to keep your own style, not having that repetitive thing that people would know it is and go, oh, I know that pattern, things like that. That in essence, that's you guys doing that, man, taking this project and then Ben keeping strong with what his vision is, and you guys embracing that and working together to bring it all. Again, I can't say more than congratulations on what you guys have accomplished.
I think it's just a really cool thing to see. And we weren't under a deadline or anything. So it was like, we just wanted to make something really unique and have this kind of like experience of translating all this stuff. And I do feel like that's why this doesn't happen as often as we would like. And, the goal from all this from the start was, I wanted to start this because I was starting to work in the film industry earlier on in my career, and it's like a never-ending arms race of new techniques. And so starting out, I was just drawing and illustrating in Photoshop, but then quickly it's just like I needed to look like photoreal, which ends up being photo bashing. And I just feel like I basically got to the point where every day I didn't feel like an artist anymore, because I felt like I was cutting images from Google and mashing them together. And that's what the industry wanted. And I was like, well, I need something for myself. Like what can I do that will allow me to keep my voice intact and feel like an artist at the end of the day? And so HUXLEY was a result of like, these are all the things I loved at the beginning of my career, when I was just like, I love drawing, I love creating things on paper. And it was like me distilling that into a product over many years of maybe frustrations, or the industry is going to go where it's going to go. And I'm happy to stick along and level up with the industry. But I needed that kind of pure thing for myself that made me remember why I loved being an artist in the first place. And just thinking back of all the things that inspired me growing up, like Kira and Mobius and all these things. And I want to hopefully create something that will do that for someone else from what those guys did to me, and like passing the torch down, and hopefully creating, I always say this to my friends, but it's like there's a finite resource of imagined worlds that have been created by humans over time. Sorry, I'm going to get kind of deep here, but like I feel like it's our life's duty as artists to help expand that in some way. And I hope HUXLEY in some way down the line will help expand that a bit. So when the next generation comes, there is a bigger pool of these cool imagined worlds that have never existed before, and they can find a way to like make their own and push it even further. And we're all trying to make really cool new things that inspire the next generation, that will then create something even cooler and inspire the next generation, and so on. And I just think it's a beautiful thing that we can do our whole life, and there's no end to it, which when I was younger, that scared me. But as I get older, I'm fascinated and excited that art never ends.
Always learning. Well, real quick for Antonio, the whole conversation started up when you started pulling these models up. How much RAM do you have? What do you have? 32 gigs? What do you have?
I have the last ones, so it's GDDR5. There's only 32, but because my BIOS don't let me put more, so 32.
You have 32 gigs of RAM on the machine.
32 gigs of RAM on the machine, yeah.
Yeah, because people are asking, as far as ZBrush goes, more RAM you have, the better, and the higher processor. It's all CPU. There's no video card being used, except for Bevel Pro and Polygroup It. Those are the only two things that are using GPU. So, and Antonio, I don't know if it's possible, but someone was asking, I can pull your screen down. If you have the daemon, somebody was like, if you could pull the daemon up, they'd love to see the daemon in ZBrush if you have it.
Yeah, please put down my.
I'll pull you down.
I can show while Antonio is searching for the asset. I can show the. Just one moment. So whenever we do stuff like this, where is this process assets? It's been a while. Whenever we do stuff like this, so all the updates that Antonio is going to be sending me through Skype or whatever we're using, I'll be just saving them for the process video at the end. So this is like the very first thing I think that we did, was like the first kind of sculpt, and then the first test piece of asset that happened was the demon's head, and it was just kind of testing out what we can do and what's the fidelity that we can use. So it's almost like a vertical slice in some regards, where it's like the fully finished realized asset is just a completely textured and sculpted head from demon, basically. So we were like, all right, this is kind of the quality that we can do. And then I do some test renders just to see how it would look in shot lighting and stuff like that, which was expanded on when we actually got into the asset production later on. But this is like some of the early stuff that we're talking about, like figuring out the mechanics of him. I think this is what Ben was mentioning, but he was a lot skinnier and a lot kind of.
That's a huge change.
Let me do some stuff. Let me try something.
Yeah, and then
that was the part where Lucas and me were starting, like, dreaming about complexity on things, and was like, no way.
I was like, like 11. We got to go to 11.
Yes, this was from 1 to 11 basically. The change there, like all of the extra batteries,
Boom.
extra
That
cables,
was
all of
crazy.
the other stuff, and then just kind of working, I guess, through everything. So these are, I don't know if you found the model, Antonio, but these were some of the.
I'm copying from the from one of the folder to the other
Yeah,
ones.
but this is pretty high res, I think, on my end. So this would be one of the, maybe the final sculpt.
Yeah, I think that's the
Demon.
final one.
Yeah, that looks pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, you can see from the two you're swapping to just how much you did change proportionally. It wasn't just even the skinny in the waist. The shoulders got bigger. They got taller. Like there's a lot of change happening there.
A lot of cables.
Very important.
Lots of cable.
Lots of cables.
Small to ribbed. I was obsessed with the ratio of small to like these giant ribbed cables.
Yeah. No, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay. But real quick before we switch, I gave Ben's ArtStation because they were asking for it. Sava, they were asking if you have one, so I just want to give them all links.
Yeah, there's one for myself and Antonio as well.
Yeah. So I'll switch to him and I'm going to try and find them so I can share.
Do you want me to share the link?
Sure. If you want to put them in our chat, and then I can put them in the chat with everybody else.
Cool. We'll do.
All right. Well, I'm going to switch now. Antonio's going to show actually the demon in ZBrush.
Oh yeah, there we go.
So you can see a lot of cables. That was crazy for cables.
So how did you handle that then for the animating then? Like, because obviously that's a lot of
Yeah, I guess they did have to flex a little bit. We didn't have like a shoulder. I mean, we did have a shoulder joint, but then we just ended up cabling. It's all
hidden by cables.
Like the joint is something like, it's here, but
I guess if we cover it, it's not look so great. But luckily, our shots were pretty just walking or slashing.
And I think Lucas did a really good job treating all this cable like only one piece. So everything was moving quite cool in the test, I think.
Yeah.
So was crazy. But I have to say, this part of the cables, I say like, Lucas, please help me with this. Yeah. That was crazy. Thanks, Lucas. I know you are watching us. Thanks, Lucas. I love you, man.
Thanks, Lucas.
A lot of the two
now. Wait, this one's 20 sub tools with 354 million across 20 sub. What processor do you have in the system? Do you know?
I have the 1 second.
And then speaking of that, Sava, since you were doing rendering and everything, right? So you had mentioned your video cards, right? That you had.
I mean,
you're using 980, right? The 984.
Yeah, I have a pretty old workstation because it's my old life, and I don't do that stuff unless for occasions like this. So I have the old workstation which has 4 980 Ti's inside of it, and then I have another workstation which is my Unreal workstation which has a new 390, and that single 390 is faster than all 4 of those combined, which is kind of crazy. But still, with those 4 GPUs, I mean, Redshift just can chew everything I personally can throw at it. I'm not saying, again, like my production is nowhere near to be compared with, the stuff happening in Hollywood. So with all the crazy effects and stuff like that. But still, for a kind of smallish independent production like this, where you're not really kind of, like in my early days of rendering way back when with V-Ray, which is an incredible render engine in itself. But back in the day when it was all CPU based, it was a lot of, thinking of doing short films, animated short films. It was always started with a question of how the hell am I going to render this? And now that's not even a question at all. Like I don't even have to think about that, especially with Unreal. Like now I'm kind of fully, Unreal family these days, which is even better in a lot of ways. But from a creative standpoint, but with Redshift, like that was my I used Octane before Redshift, and that was kind of my intro to GPU rendering, and that's where I really felt the power of GPU, and not in the sense of it liberates you in a lot of ways where you don't have to think about how are you going to render specific things, but just creatively, enables so many, like being able to walk around in a real-time viewport kind of feedback and see the lighting in sort of real time and find shots like that from cinematography perspective. That's absolute gold, because you're no longer framing to boring grayscale viewport, you're framing to light and shadow, and that's from a cinematography standpoint, that's incredibly valuable. And with Redshift on top of that, it can chew anything I can personally throw at it. So it's been my favorite offline render engine since a couple of years. I think since 2019, 18, something like that. And yeah, like my old 5-year-old, 6-year-old machine still pretty much chugs along. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah,
I have an i9.
You have an you have an i9. Okay.
i9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. I think what I was trying, because you guys are like, this is like bootstrap independent filmmaking, right? And
yeah,
people sometimes when I talk, they get all wrapped up in also the technology. I got to have the greatest and biggest and best computer to make the project happen. And I'm trying to kind of make a point here, guys. As you can see watching this, they're not going like, oh, I got to have the $20,000 machine to make this happen.
Not necessarily. I mean, my machine is i7 and 32 gigs of RAM. It's very basic. I mean, for what you can get nowadays, and
No,
it still works. I mean, with technology, especially with Redshift and with render engines like that, I think there's also a lot of mentality that comes along. I've had questions where people would say, oh, I want to make a short film, but it's like 4 minutes a frame and that's way too long. Like, that's nothing. I mean, I come from days where it was like an hour per frame or an hour and a half per frame. That was mental. And I've rendered those shots. That was an hour and a half per frame. That was like a week of rendering for a single shot. So like, at least having that experience from way back when, I think that kind of teaches you a little bit of patience, which is incredibly valuable. So, rendering something for 2 minutes per frame is absolutely blazing fast these days. And not even talking about the real-time aspects of Unreal Engine. So, there's just, the technology has enabled us to do all these things that were really, really not possible like 10 years ago even. I would always put way more emphasis, especially now, because really the technology side of things isn't as daunting as it was. Put your emphasis on the story that you're trying to tell. Put your emphasis on the craft of filmmaking. That's the stuff that's going to set your film apart, not the fact that your renders are absolutely flawless and noiseless and flickerless. I've tried my best with HUXLEY. Again, I'm not really technical. So, when you zoom in, you can spot a lot of noise and a lot of flickering in the renders for HUXLEY. But I think, the overall production of everything is what kind of gives, I hope at least, that it gives a more lasting impression than the pixel perfect, rendering quality. That's never been my focus either way. So
that's one of the qualities I really love about the final trailer. Like, because we use Redshift, I feel like it just has like a really, I don't know, it just feels like a film in a way. Like
film grain, old school.
It was very clean. And
that was a lot of achieved in comp more so than not Redshift. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it many times again. It is by far my favorite offline render engine, but I wouldn't say that's definitely specifically related to Redshift, because a lot of the quality from the actual kind of final frames came from the assets, from the design, and from the texturing that we've done. If you use all of those textures in all of those assets in any other render engine, you'll get a very, very similar image as an output. Like if you used exactly the same assets that we have and use them in Octane or V-Ray, you would get very similar outputs in terms of what the image is. But then all of the stuff that happens in comp, the way you're treating that image, that's where you make the difference. That's the kind of the artistic touch on top of something that's just like a technical render, basically. And that's something that's been true to my work for a while. Is I'm a big sucker to anamorphic lenses and to the film look. That's the kind of the cornerstone of my kind of the way I treat renders. And again, that sort of came from the limitations of, I can't have the cleanest renders ever, so I'm just gonna dump a bunch of film grain on top of it. But at the same time, like it does come from a very, kind of personal taste and stuff that I, grew up with, and the films that I kind of watched from the 90s, and that's the kind of the aesthetic that kind of influenced the images that I like to create. So all of this stuff, like I'm really pro that the film look, but achieving the film look, like it really, I would say, happens more so in comp than the actual render, apart from the lighting, of course, which is a huge chunk of it. But yeah.
I think you guys got through everything that you wanted to share with everybody, right? There's nothing that we missed. Okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of compositing stuff, but I think I touched up a little bit, brushed up a little bit on it just
Maybe
now.
some of the texture.
Yeah, I mean, I can run through some of this stuff here if you just want to.
If you want to, yeah, absolutely.
I can just give a quick shout out again, like what we talked about previously. So Lucas was our rigging artist on the project, and he rigged all of the main characters. So these are the various kind of tests that he did along the way. So I'll just run through the whole thing here. So again, how Demon is gonna move, how all the things are gonna contort. My PC just freeze.
Seriously, again, guys, it's amazing that pretty much the
There it
80s
is.
did all this. It's incredible. Oh, there you
So
go.
these
Yeah,
are
there
just
you go.
like the way it moves, and then the fact that he had this giant, like again, going back to the question of how you do design or sculpt something with movement in mind. This is where like all this stuff comes in handy with speaking with the rigger, because the Demon has this very, very strong kind of shoulder shapes, and they're if you think about those shapes in themselves, like they're not the most practical. I mean, if he's gonna do this, they're gonna collapse on his head. So we kind of have to, but graphically, like they create such a strong shape, so we can't really just shave them off and make them more, I guess, practical. So there's a way of what we did. Like you'll see here, there's like the way they kind of stretch outwards to allow them to bend inwards and not intersect with the head. So there's a lot of things like that, and the mechanics of that would be super complex. If we didn't have the cables to hide them, basically. So with the shoulders stretching outwards, the cables just work wonders basically there. And you can see all the individual bones here. Like there's a lot of complexity with all the individual antennas and stuff. How the character is controlled. Same thing with all of the other characters. These are just like super low res images, and then HUXLEY being a ninja. Yeah. This is Mihailo, who created the ship Onyx, and then he did a little bit of kind of mechanical rigging for the engine that we never see, but it is there.
It's there, yeah, that's true. Was like,
it's one of the I mean that's one of the things with the stuff like this. It's like the more detail you can put in there, and like it's always gonna be. There was a moment where we're gonna have a shot like this. Yeah,
the landing gear as well is in there that you barely see for a second, but it
is there. It opens up quite nicely.
Sava, what was the software? Before I forget, what was the software you used for the crowdfunding?
It's called Anima. So it's AN.
Let me see if I can find it.
M-A-I. Sorry, my spelling game is awful.
ANIMA.
ANIMA. Yeah. So yeah, this is like the process of creating the environments and stuff like that, and how much of this are we gonna see in the actual shot? Then from the models to the initial rough lighting to all the textures. This is the shot that kind of I think underwent like the most iteration. Like there's a lot of like this background here is the actual background from the panel, and it already looks pretty freaking cool. Like you can pass it off in a shot like quite easily. But then we did a lot of variations on the width of the demon's cape. Do we want it closer to the body, wider to the body? Do we want more detail in the foreground? Do we want to see the demon as a whole? Then the little legs here kind of felt a little bit like they're taking away some of his power. But then, so we simplified the foreground elements and kind of made it a little bit more simplified. in the lower parts of the frame. And then this is with the final DMP that came in the background. So most of this kind of 3D based digital matte painting. And that really kind of livens up the shot. And this is kind of, again, one of the different environments and scattering all the various. I think this is one of the moments. I don't have the sketch for this, but I think this was when I was kind of doing the environment assembly, and I scattered all these kind of elements here and sent this over to Ben, and then he basically what you see here is what he kind of he drew. I don't have that here. I can probably dig it up somewhere, but it's all of this basically just in line drawing. So it's like, oh yeah, let's add again, go crazy on the cables. I think that's one of the rules.
More cables all the time.
That's one of the rules with this is when in doubt, just go more cables.
Cables
and your guys' thing in meetings. Just put a cable on it. Just put some cables on it.
And these are all, like this is like the close to final with all the assets in there. And this is just a raw render without any compositing done. So again, this is all just kind of testing out the various assets in various environments. Again, like this is the process of the process of making an environment, but then we didn't have the demon, so it's just using a placeholder model, and it just looks like this little skinny guy in there. But then you compare it to this, and it's an entirely different ballgame. And that's always one of the things, like you kind of have to. Animation is always like a very slow drip feed of things happening very, very slowly. Like you'll get a few updates here or there. And then you kind of have to trust the process that you will get to something like this eventually when everything sort of comes together, where all the design work, all the asset work, all the lighting sort of comes together. And then this is, again, a little bit of a overview of the kind of the individual kind of substance painter assets. And you can see like the very different, the various different layers of rust and the leakage that went into basically all of this. So these are some.
We're exploring like all city or more desert.
More city, more desert. Meet in the middle, split the difference. Some of the best, art direction comments. Split the difference.
It was that early demon, because I think that's like where we started. Like the goal for the demon was always like, I want it to look like something that could eat a Terminator for breakfast. And so it's like, don't stop until it's like, yep, that's it. There it is.
That's exactly the best description for it ever. And then again, Stephen Corman doing his magic with kind of 3D DMP work. So most of this is actually CGI stuff that he then added a lot of detail in DMP on top of that. Again, the backgrounds, like this is like just the level of detail in this city shot. That's unfortunately, it's one of those things when you see Steven's work and you're like, oh, this is so good, but a lot of this is just hidden by the demon in the foreground. So you see the DMP by itself is, oh man, this is. Can we just use it like this? Can we take the demon out? And then you put the demon on top, and
then I put the link to the crowd. Is that the correct one in our chat?
Let me see.
Just to make sure before I give them the link.
No. That's the one. AXYZ Anima. This is some of the, again, like the redshift kind of, I guess, shading work done on the assets, just kind of checking how they respond to lighting in various different situations. So that's always some of the things that you kind of have to do and make all these turntable renders. So you would be checking them in the normal kind of daylight scenario, and then mostly in the nighttime scenario, which is what we had with artificial lighting. But it is very important to do that with most of the assets. I think if I go back here, something like this, for example, like it is super important to do this stuff at pretty much every stage of asset development. Every time we have an update, I would kick off these turntable renders and check all the surfaces and how they react. We would do two turntables, one for the full body, one just for the close-up of the head, for all assets, so you can check all the material responses and how everything looks, because this is going to be the actual final shader used. And any mistakes showing here, like this is where you catch them. If you catch them in shot later on, it's a little bit late.
Thanks.
but yeah, so after that, like this is probably some of the with this stuff again. For example, the compositing here is most of this is just Steven's shot, and then I composited on top like a little bit of effects, a little bit of haze, and then did a lot of kind of film convert and grading on top to get it into that film look, added in the characters and stuff like that. But then for stuff like this, like you can see sort of, you know, the before and after, like the first, like the raw render and with all the layers of haze and fog and grading done on top to emulate that specific film look. Again, like that's, you know, your base 3D render will give you the correct lighting, but then all of the little tells of what makes something filmic, you have to do that in comp. So, you know, for me, again, it's anamorphics with film, specifically anamorphic lenses with film. And anamorphic lenses, for one, they always have a very pronounced, like the distortion, barrel distortion. They have really pronounced chromatic aberration, which fringes a little bit more towards blue than anything else. And they have a very specific depth of field, bokeh shaped. And then on top of that, if it's shot on film, where it's going to behave differently in the shadows, it's going to behave differently on the highlights. It's going to have that very specific film grain. So there's a lot of those little signifiers that you don't necessarily, you know, notice immediately, but hopefully when you see it, it has that kind of filmic look. And I think why that's important to me is, you know, because I grew up in that time, and because those are the type of films that I like. Or, you know, the type of films that I think of being as like cinematic masterpieces. When I see those signifiers, like the film grain, the depth of field shape, the chromatic aberration, the bloom, all of those things immediately, you know, make me think of those films that I like, and immediately trigger all of the kind of cinematic words to me, or cinematic signifiers. And that's what kind of makes, you know, apart from the cinematography, those signifiers are something that makes an image cinematic to me. So that's why, you know, a lot of those kind of final sprinkle moments happen in. Oh, this is glitching out.
With that said, Ben, what was your inspiration for Huxley and the plot and story? What inspiration did you have from this?
I mean, I think a lot of it was the melting pot of things I mentioned. I mean, I'm sure there's like so many movies growing up and all this kind of stuff. Definitely a melting pot of just like French and Japanese, like comics and anime and all that stuff mixed together. Hayao Miyazaki movies. There's just so many different and unique worlds that they kind of open the doorway to, in my opinion, that I feel like hasn't been like explored or taken very far in film and cinema. And a lot of that was me just like mixing all my favorite things together and coming up with something new. And while writing this, I was definitely reading a lot more like storytelling books, script writing books, and leveling up that skill as I went. Had I written everything from the start, it probably would have been terrible, but because it took so long, it allowed me to grow as a writer as well. And yeah, just a melting pot of all my favorite things, I guess.
So what's next for you guys with this project, Huxley? What's next for you?
Well, at the moment, we have Ari Rod of Rod Productions and Jerome Chen signed on to produce an adaptation for a feature film, and in the middle of trying to make a CG animated show as well, which I'd, you know, Sava be involved as much as he would like, and pushing it into games and books and novels and basically just every category possible, like we would in any of our franchises and things we love. Just I want to consume and read more stories and have more stuff. And the comics right now are about to be shipping out the physicals for issue 1 and getting all that started on the publishing side as well. Just growing it as big as and as far as possible. With every ounce of energy I have.
Yeah, well, guys, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your day to be part of this stream. I know, Ben, you said you were hoping it would inspire people. I can tell you for a fact it is. There's a lot of people in chat how inspired they are. And I cannot say this enough, guys. Congratulations, man. You and everybody else that worked on this project, you guys just killed it. It's a beautifully done trailer, and I hope it does continue doing all those things you just said, Ben, because it would be awesome.
And
growing.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's because I spent all the time building it and creating the whole product before I kind of put it out the door. Things are moving faster than had I not done that otherwise. And I also don't want to overlook or hark on the fact that like this was such a small team that all pulled their weight in such huge ways. Like we mentioned this in an earlier call that like Antonio really led the charge on like all the hero character assets, which doesn't happen often on a big production. Like maybe you do like a bird in the background or the eyeball of the big creature, but he was like doing a ton of heavy lifting on like every hero asset, which is pretty phenomenal. And Sava as well, just like doing such incredible work on so many different levels. And it was really cool to see such a small, multi-talented team just doing incredible stuff all together. It's like a punk rock crew or something, like doing awesome stuff.
Exactly what it was.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I'll let you get on with your nights and your day. So again, thank you for being a part of this, everybody. This was our first industry spotlight. We're going to be doing more of these throughout the year. HUXLEY was our first one. So this was really good to see how you guys built this project from the ground up using ZBrush, using Redshift, and everything else they use for all you watching. Thank you so much for being a part of this stream. Please keep in mind they're streaming on this channel on a regular basis. And in fact, we're going to be live at NAB showroom floor. So if you are in Las Vegas at NAB, come by the Maxon booth, say hello to me. I'll be there Sunday, and I'll be there Monday. So, but whatever, the HUXLEY thing, guys, awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. Really, congratulations.
Yes.
Thanks to you, man.
Thanks for having us.
So this is Paul Gaboury with ZBrushLIVE, and you've been watching an episode of Industry Spotlight. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
What do you think it is? It's glorious. It's dangerous out there. The city provides protection, some sort of order to this chaos. If we follow the rules and keep our heads down, there's nothing to worry about.